I've always thought of myself as the kind of person who keeps life firmly within the lines, a planner, a strategist, the sort who sets alarms with backup alarms just in case. I don't thrive on chaos. I avoid it. But that morning proved that no matter how tightly you think you're holding the reins, life has its own way of jerking them from your hands. My flight to Barcelona was at 8:45. I woke up at 7:20. Not the good kind of I overslept a bit late, the bad kind, where your brain doesn't even start with grogginess, it goes straight to panic. My head was still foggy from working through the night on a project, my body stiff from the hours hunched over my desk. The suitcase I'd meant to pack in the evening sat in the corner like an accusation. I didn't even have the mental energy to check a list. I grabbed my backpack, yanked open drawers, stuffed in clothes without folding them, t-shirts, socks, a charger I hoped was for my phone, and didn't even check if I'd taken underwear. Outside, the city was just waking up. Pale morning light spilled over the street as I bolted down the stairs. A taxi idled at the curb, the driver leaning on the wheel like he'd been ready to leave without me. I muttered something like a good morning and dove in, the backpack thumping against my knees. The coffee I'd made while half-conscious was still burning hot, but I drank it in desperate gulps. Each swallow was a gamble. Would it wake me up or scald my throat beyond repair? My heart was already racing, but caffeine added a jittery edge to my panic. I watched the blur of buildings whip past the taxi windows and tried not to think about the possibility of sprinting through the terminal like a man possessed. I've always hated starting a trip like this. You're supposed to ease into a journey, have the little rituals, check your bag twice, look forward to the adventure. But I was careening toward the airport like someone trying to outrun their own mistakes. And I didn't know it yet, but this rough, chaotic start was exactly what was about to change everything. The airport was already humming with that strange, restless energy that always hangs in the air before morning flights. A mix of yawns, rolling suitcases, and tinny announcements echoing off the high ceilings. The smell of burnt espresso and reheated croissants clung to the air, and every check-in counter seemed to have a line that moved at the pace of a glacier. I joined one of them, shifting from foot to foot, my eyes flicking constantly to the clock on the wall. 7 minutes passed. The line moved 3 steps. My pulse was starting to sync with the tick of the second hand when I saw her. She was about 4 people ahead of me, and it was impossible not to notice her. Not because she was loud or dramatic, but because she had a kind of stillness that drew the eye like the calm center of a busy scene. A small, well-worn suitcase stood at her side. She wore a caramel-colored coat that looked like it would feel soft under your fingers, and a wide-brimmed hat tilted just enough to cast a shadow across her cheekbones. Strands of dark hair slipped free from beneath the brim and swayed when she moved. She was holding an old film camera, the kind with weight to it, the kind you have to commit to using, and she was taking pictures. Not of the obvious things like the architecture or the signs, but of the mundane, a man fumbling with his passport, a child dragging a stuffed rabbit across the floor, a tired couple leaning into each other. And then her lens turned toward me. I froze, halfway through adjusting my backpack strap. There was a soft click. Our eyes met over the space between us. For a moment, the sound and movement of the airport faded, like someone had turned down the volume. Instead of looking away, she smiled. Quick, warm, and almost conspiratorial. When the line inched forward and brought us side by side at the check-in counter, I found myself speaking before my brain had a chance to filter the words. Did you just take my picture? Her mouth curved in a smirk that made me feel like I was walking into a trap I didn't mind. Maybe. You've got the face of someone terrified of missing their flight. It's interesting. That's not terror. That's called desperation, I said, handing over my passport to the attendant. Even better, she replied without missing a beat. I'm doing a project on emotions during travel. That's how I learned her name was Lara, and that she, like me, was headed to Barcelona. Boarding was chaos, as boarding always is. A mix of people who think they should be first, people who don't know what group they're in, and a handful of smug veterans who wait until the last possible minute. Lara and I ended up in the same boarding zone, our tickets in hand, shuffling forward with the slow tide of passengers. She carried her suitcase like it weighed nothing, the camera slung over her shoulder, occasionally lifting it to catch some fleeting moment, a gate agent yawning, a teenager glued to his phone, the blur of someone rushing past. Every time the shutter clicked, it was like she was gathering little fragments of the world, pieces most people never stopped to notice. When we reached the plane, I scanned my ticket and made my way down the aisle. My seat was near the middle, window side, decent enough. I tossed my backpack into the overhead compartment, sat down, and started pulling out my headphones. And then, just when I was about to put them on, I heard a familiar voice. "Oh, look at that. What a coincidence." I turned, and there she was, standing in the aisle with that same slight smirk, ticket in hand. "You're sitting next to me?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Apparently," she said, sliding into the seat beside me. Completely by accident. Obviously, I wasn't sure whether to believe her. Part of me thought maybe she'd maneuvered this, but then again, maybe it really was chance. Either way, I wasn't about to complain. The flight was just over 2 hours, but it didn't feel like that. From the moment we took off, conversation flowed like we'd already known each other for years. She told me about hitchhiking through Eastern Europe, about sleeping in train stations, about a night she'd spent in a lighthouse on the coast of Portugal. I told her about my work. Not the boring technical stuff, but the strange, human moments that happen when you spend too much time in office. Somewhere over the Mediterranean, we got onto the topic of the odd little habits people have on planes. The ones who always kick off their shoes, the people who clap when the plane lands, the ones who treat the overhead bins like a game of Tetris. Lara laughed so freely and so suddenly that a man across the aisle glanced over, startled. Her laughter was disarming. Not polite, not forced, the kind that catches you off guard and pulls you into it, so you start laughing too, even if you don't know why. I realized I was making jokes just to hear it again. And somewhere between that laughter and the stories, the turbulence outside didn't seem to matter. When we landed in Barcelona, the afternoon light poured through the airport windows in soft gold, painting everything in a warm haze. The terminal was buzzing, the shuffle of luggage wheels, the hum of foreign languages overlapping, the sharp scent of coffee from a nearby cafe. We walked together through passport control, still talking as if the conversation from the plane had never been paused. At the exit, we slowed, that subtle, awkward moment when two travelers part ways without having discussed whether they should. "So, this is where we say goodbye?" I asked, not entirely ready to. She tilted her head, as if considering it. "Well, my hotel's in the Gothic Quarter. Where's yours?" "Close enough," I said. 5-minute walk from there." Her eyes lit up, not in a dramatic way, just enough to hint at a decision forming. "Then maybe we don't say goodbye yet. I was thinking of walking around the city while there's still daylight. You could come with me." It sounded casual, but there was something in her tone, an invitation that was more than just about passing time. We left the airport together and split a taxi to the center. The driver dropped us near Placa Rail, where the narrow streets branched off like a maze. The city felt alive in that distinctly Mediterranean way. The chatter from restaurant terraces, the faint music drifting from open windows, the scent of warm bread and salt from the nearby sea. What she called a little walk quickly unraveled into an hours-long wandering. She led us through the twisting alleys of the Gothic Quarter, stopping to photograph crumbling stone walls and the way the light hit the balconies lined with potted plants. At one corner, she bought churros from a street vendor, warm, sugar-dusted, and served with thick, melted chocolate. We stood in the shadow of a centuries-old cathedral, eating them like kids hiding candy from their parents. As the sun began to set, we climbed a small hill where the rooftops spread out beneath us, glowing orange and pink. Lara took more photos of the skyline, of strangers passing by, and yes, of me. Sometimes she'd lower the camera and just look. I wasn't sure if she was studying me for her project or for something else entirely, but I didn't ask. We didn't check the time until the streetlights came on, and by then, my legs ached, my phone battery was dead, and I realized I didn't care. The next morning, the sunlight spilling through my hotel window felt almost intrusive, like it was cutting short a dream I hadn't finished. My legs still carried the pleasant heaviness from yesterday's wandering, and my mind was still replaying snippets of Lara's laughter, the way her voice carried when she got excited about describing a photograph. I was halfway through making the terrible instant coffee the hotel offered when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Do you know how to ride a scooter?" Came her voice, without so much as a greeting. I laughed. "And if I say no, then it'll be more fun." 20 minutes later, I was standing outside my hotel, watching her approach, helmet in one hand, that old film camera hanging from her neck. The scooter was small, a faded blue thing that looked like it had been part of Barcelona's streets for decades. "You sure this is safe?" I asked, adjusting the too large helmet she handed me. "Absolutely not," she said, grinning. "Now, get on." The first 5 minutes were chaos. The streets in the old part of the city were barely wide enough for a car, let alone a nervous beginner trying to steer with someone perched behind him. She barked directions over the wind. "Left." "No, right." "Slow down." "Now speed up." And each shout was laced with both urgency and laughter. I wasn't sure whether she was enjoying the ride or my sheer incompetence more. We eventually broke free from the tangle of streets and emerged onto the coastal road. The sea stretched out to our right, the sunlight sparking off its surface like shards of glass. The air was salted and clean, filling my lungs in a way city air never does. When we stopped, it was on a rocky outcrop where the waves hurled themselves against the shore in a steady, relentless rhythm. We sat there for hours, helmets forgotten, the scooter leaning on its kickstand behind us. She asked me questions no one ever does. Not the polite small talk, but the real ones, the ones that make you search for honest answers. And I found myself telling her things I hadn't told friends I'd known for years. There's a strange kind of trust that forms in those in-between moments, when you're far from home with someone you barely know, and yet it feels like you've shared a lifetime already. Sitting there with Lara, the spray of the sea cooling our skin, I started to wonder what exactly it was about her that made time stretch and disappear all at once. By the third morning, I'd settled into the idea that Lara was simply woven into this trip now, like she'd been in the plan all along. Even if I'd met her by accident, even if 2 days earlier she'd just been a stranger in an airport queue. I was still in that half-awake haze when my phone lit up with a message from her. "Breakfast? I know a place." No good morning. No question mark. Just the assumption I'd say yes. And of course I did. The cafe she chose was tucked away on a narrow side street, barely big enough for 6 tables. The air inside was warm with the smell of fresh bread and coffee, the walls lined with shelves of mismatched books and potted plants. She was already there, camera on the table beside her plate, sipping something that looked too small to be a coffee and too dark to be tea. I ordered, sat down, and before I could even ask what she had planned for the day, she dropped it like it was nothing. "I have a ticket to Milan. Tomorrow morning." I set my cup down too quickly, the coffee sloshing over the edge. "You're leaving?" She said it lightly, but her eyes flicked to mine as if gauging my reaction. "You could stay another day," I suggested, trying to sound casual. She smiled, but it was a small, almost sad smile. "If I stay one more day, I might not leave at all." That sentence hung between us, filling the little cafe like an unspoken truth we were both afraid to touch. We didn't talk about it again. Instead, we spent the day walking, though this time, it wasn't the same carefree wandering as before. There was a quiet urgency in the way we lingered in places, like we were trying to trap time in photographs and stolen glances. She photographed street performers, the shadows of palm trees on sunlit walls, my reflection in a shop window when I wasn't paying attention. As evening fell, we climbed the steps to a viewpoint overlooking the whole city. Barcelona stretched out below us, rooftops glowing under the last streaks of sunset, the Mediterranean a deep, endless blue. We stayed until the lights of the city began to twinkle on, neither of us mentioning that this was our last full day together. That night, there was no question of going our separate ways after dinner. We just kept walking, as if some unspoken agreement had been made to delay the inevitable. The streets of Barcelona after dark had a different kind of pulse. The laughter spilling from tapas bars, the metallic clatter of plates, the faint, distant beat of music from clubs hidden in side streets. We wandered without a map, following wherever the glow of street lamps or the sound of a guitar took us. At one point, we found ourselves in a quiet square where a lone musician was playing under a tree, the leaves rustling with the soft night breeze. Lara stopped, leaning against a low stone wall, and took a photo without even looking through the viewfinder. "Why do you take so many pictures?" I asked, watching her adjust the focus. She thought for a moment, lowering the camera. "Because memories fade and people forget the details. Photos, they cheat time. They let you keep a moment even when it's gone." Something about the way she said it made my chest tighten. Later, we ended up on the roof of her hotel. It wasn't the most glamorous rooftop, just a few plastic chairs and the low hum of air conditioning units. But from there, we could see the city lights stretching all the way to the horizon. The night was warm, and we sat side by side, saying less and less as the hours passed. She took a few more photos, though now she seemed to be photographing me more than the skyline. I could hear the faint click of the shutter between the distant sounds of the city. At some point, I stopped trying to smile for them. She didn't ask me to. There was a weight in the silence, not uncomfortable, but heavy with the awareness that the night was slipping away from us. Every minute felt both too short and too long. I didn't want to look at the clock. When we finally stood to go back inside, she glanced at me, and there was something in her expression I hadn't seen before, as if she wanted to say something but decided against it. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I didn't push. The morning of her departure arrived too quickly, as mornings like that always do. The air felt heavier somehow, as if the city itself knew it was time for her to go. I met her in the hotel lobby. She was already there, suitcase beside her, wearing the same caramel-colored coat from the airport, but now it looked different on her, like it carried the weight of the past 3 days. We didn't waste words on breakfast or coffee. The taxi to the airport was already waiting. Inside, we sat in a quiet that wasn't quite awkward, but wasn't entirely comfortable either. The streets slid by outside the window, balconies strung with laundry, scooters weaving between cars, the blue flash of the sea appearing and disappearing between buildings. I caught her reflection in the glass, her eyes tracing the scenery, and wondered if she was already somewhere else in her head. In Milan? Maybe, or somewhere even further away. At the terminal, the bustle of departures wrapped around us. Voices calling out gate numbers, rolling suitcases clattering against tile, the high-pitched beeps of security scanners. We walked together until the point where our paths would split, my side toward the taxi stand, hers toward the check-in counters. She stopped, unzipped her bag, and pulled out a small envelope. It was unmarked, sealed neatly, and fit perfectly in my hand. "Don't open it until you're home," she said, her voice light, as if this was just another casual thing, but her eyes stayed on mine a moment too long. I wanted to say something, to ask if we'd see each other again, to suggest meeting in some other city months from now, but the words felt too heavy for the moment, and maybe she knew that. She smiled, stepped back, and with one last glance, turned and merged into the crowd. The hat, the coat, the suitcase, they all disappeared into the current of travelers. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the space where she'd been, my fingers tightening around the envelope. It's strange how quickly someone can become a part of your world, and how just as quickly they can walk out of it, leaving you standing still while everything else keeps moving. The flight home felt longer than it should have, like the air between the seats had thickened. I kept the envelope in my jacket pocket, its weight impossibly small and yet impossible to ignore. Every so often, my fingers would brush against it, and I'd feel that same pull, curiosity wrestling with the promise I'd made her. Not until you're home. Out the window, the world unrolled in slow motion. The jagged outline of the Pyrenees, a patchwork of fields fading into cloud, then nothing but an endless stretch of white. I tried to distract myself with the in-flight magazine, with music, with the gentle hum of the engines, but everything seemed to circle back to her. The way she tilted her head when she was about to laugh. The quick, sure movements of her hands when she adjusted the camera lens. The way she'd watch the world, like every second was worth keeping. When we landed, I moved with the silent flow of passengers through the terminal, the familiar signs and announcements pulling me back into my own city, my own life. The cab ride home was uneventful. The streets I'd seen 100 times passing by as though I were still somewhere else entirely. I didn't turn on the lights when I got inside. I just dropped my bag, took off my jacket, and sat at the kitchen table with the envelope in front of me. For a moment, I hesitated, not because I didn't want to see what was inside, but because I knew that once I did, it would be over. The trip, the days with her, the feeling that something unexpected had cracked my carefully controlled life open. But promises are meant to be kept. I slid my finger under the flap and tore it open. Inside the envelope was a photograph. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Me, sitting on a rocky shore, wind whipping through my hair, the foam of the sea spraying around my feet. But as I studied it, I realized it wasn't just a photo. It captured something deeper. The unguarded laugh I had while trying to balance on the rocks, the tilt of my head as the sun hit my face just right, the fleeting moment of pure, uncalculated joy. Beneath the image, in small, neat handwriting, she had written, "Some meetings are short, but they change everything." I sat there, staring at the photograph, feeling a strange mixture of melancholy and gratitude. She was gone. The streets of Barcelona were now a memory. The scooter rides, the sunsets, the rooftops, all confined to that fleeting past. And yet, in a way I couldn't quite explain, I felt more alive than I had before, more open to the randomness of life, more aware that control is only an illusion, and that sometimes the briefest encounters leave the deepest marks. I smiled at the photo, tracing the edges with my finger. That single moment, captured and sent across miles, reminded me that life isn't just about schedules, deadlines, or plans. Sometimes it's about the chaos, the laughter, the chance meetings that feel like fate. And maybe that's what made the memory of Lara so indelible. Not the city, not the places we visited, not even the photos themselves, but the way she reminded me that life could surprise you even in the middle of a morning that started completely off-plan. I placed the photo on the kitchen counter, feeling its quiet weight, and sat back. The world felt bigger now, somehow, and I knew I would carry that day, that trip, and that brief, extraordinary connection with me forever.